Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today is none other than famed Richard Sharpe, but looking a little bit different than you may have seen or read about in the books, because this fella here, quick story on this guy, there is a chap by the name of Bill and he is behind Lost Heresy Miniatures. Now you've seen his work on the channel before. I've painted the Russian fella for Silver Bayonet from his collection. And he's actually the chap who sculpted the licensed Richard Sharpe for Wargames Atlantic. So this guy that I've got in front of me here today is kind of semi-official, if you will. So the list of paints for this one is a little bit longer than usual because there is quite a few odd little bits and pieces on them, but the steps themselves are relatively simple. So all of the paints will be listed in the description below. The same as always, let's get started. So whether you've got the plastic version or you've got a 3D print like I have here, first thing to do, of course, is to go and prime him. Now I've used here Ash Grey from the Army Painter because while he is going to be predominantly dark greens and blacks, it's going to be easier to apply a lot of the other colors over the top of a slightly more neutral grey. So his skin tone, some of his equipment and what have you, that'll be easier than having to layer up from black or even a dark green. You could use those, there's nothing saying you can't. I just like doing things the easy way. Now I have also come back and you may see a very subtle difference in a couple of patches of color, and that's where after having primed him I noticed, whoops, I'd left quite some 3D support scars on him. So I came back with a little bit of a file and then have popped over the top with the brush on primer. So there is a little bit of a color difference, but not so much that you're going to notice it once he's painted. And indeed, you could just brush him by hand here. So as far as base coats go, we're going to start with his skin, which tends to be the easiest for most human miniatures. Now I'm using here Agate skin from the Army Painter. And a quick blast of this over his hands. And his shirt, his jacket rather, is pretty open. It can be quite messy at this stage. You see, it's more important that you just get the colors in the right places than not hitting the green jacket, because of course we're going to paint that later. So you may find that this will take 2 coats to get a nice solid finish, but just let this one dry thoroughly before trying to blast another one over the top. Man, that is such a good likeness of Sean Bean. What I'm going to turn to now is actually Bootstrap Brown, and we're going to paint in the leather parts of the reinforced trousers. Doing this now, we can be a little bit messier, same as the other things we've been doing. And we can use our green stage to tidy these up. Now here is where we're actually going to jump back and forth between the same colors a couple of times. Ordinarily, I like to lay down a color and then be finished with it. But for all of the lacing on his jacket, it's going to be a little bit easier if we start first of all with some angel green, which is going to be the predominant color of the jacket itself. You see, I'm just going to blast this in between the bits where the lacing is, because being able to go over this in a couple of seconds with the black color that I want to use, it's going to be easier than painting in the black and then trying to reach in between these bits with the green. Well, it looks messy now. We're about to put a stop to that. What I have is Strap Grey. Now this one is from the historical range. And if you know me, I am absolutely feral for a good dark grey paint. What I'm going to do now is, carefully, as much as I can, go over the piping. Now I am also going to use this as the base color for a lot of his leather equipment, which we'll get to later. But like I said, we are jumping back and forth between a couple of colors this time in a way I ordinarily wouldn't. All the same, once the piping is done, comes our next wee trick. Now with that done, what I have is a small dry brush and a little bit of deep grey. You'll see now why I'm talking about going back and forth on these colours. I'm going to lightly flick along the edges of the piping here, just to give them a bit of texture. And honestly, by the time we're finished, this will probably not stand out at all, but it doesn't hurt to do it. And I am interested to see if I can make these blacks look a little bit different to one another once the model is done. So passing over those a couple of times just to pick out the edges. Now, carrying on with our base coats, what I have is Wyvern Fury. The sash that Sharpe is wearing is quite a strong red, but it wasn't particularly bright. And now, at last, we're going to return to Angel Green. So, now, over the jacket proper, and his trousers as well. You may find in some areas that you do want to come back and give this a second coat, but I'd suggest for the most part, this will actually cover quite well over our ash grey. Just mind you don't hit all that work we've done on the lacing. As well, here, the reason for doing the trousers brown first will become a little clearer, as it's now much easier to tidy up with the green than the other way around. As if by magic, there he starts looking like Sharpe to my eyes. So now, like I said, going back and forth between colours, I'm going to return here to strap grey, not sharp grey, goodness me. And over the black leather stuff, apply a layer of this. Now the bits like his silver whistle that I am going over the top of is on purpose. Okay, there's our boy starting to take shape. What I'm going to use for the rifle here, this is actually Ruddy Terra. Now this one's from the Blanche range, and you'll see it's a orangey, quite warm brown, which I think suits the Baker rifle quite well. If you wanted to though, you could use something like Ruddy Umber, maybe a little bit more red there, but it's up to you. This I think is pretty much spot on. You'll see I also finally remembered that he's got a strap holding his rifle to his arm, so I've painted that in with a bit of that strap grey from earlier. But now what I have is Mocca skin, and I'm going to use this to paint in the wooden stakes. Standard equipment for the 95th rifles. And also we'll paint in the torch with this. Now we're starting to get through all of those little last odd bits and pieces. For the satchel, I'm going to use leather brown. Take my time with the strap around his shoulders as well. Now, at least in the series, Sharpe's got quite light, almost sandy hair. So I'm going to start with Paratrooper Tan to base coat this and not forget his sideburns. Now, it's quite funny because the uniform itself is relatively simple, but there's so many little odd bits and pieces on the figure to do. Speaking of odd, I have space dust, which... I love saying it. I'm going to use this as the base coat for the flames. Don't need to be terribly careful with this. And you'll see it will need to come back and have a second coat applied. But just go straight over the top of the wrap there. It won't matter. Now back to our dry brush from earlier. And I have some legendary red. What I'm going to do is concentrating on the higher points. So I want to leave like these little flicky bits right at the base in just yellow. This is not a perfect method for painting fire, but it is nice and quick. So concentrating a little bit more orange towards the top part. And finally a little bit of strap grey. And you want to be fairly sparing with this, just at the extreme outer edges and near the tip. Now with Ancient Stone, I'm going to get in here and paint in the cloth part that is wrapped around the head of the torch. I'll also use this, I'm pretty sure, well, it might be a small pouch. I kind of feel like it could be garlic. Either is going to be fine with a bit of Ancient Stone. Now, finally getting near the end of the base coats here. What I have is plate mail metal, and this is going to be, funnily enough, the silvery bits. But anything which is going to be gold or brass or what have you later, it will also be helpful to just lay down a quick coat of this first. So take your time here. Oh, all these bloody buttons. Now, I did have to think about what kind of cross our Silver Bayonet Sharpe would be wearing. And I kind of figured, I can't imagine a fellow like Sharpe having a gold cross. It just seems out of character for a fellow who's come up from the ranks. He's not likely to have the money to go flaunting that kind of thing. And then it occurred to me, wait a second, it's Silver Bayonet. why would he not have a silver cross, considering how many things in this game are weak to silver? So that's why I've stuck with that. A little bit of visual interest there might be to paint that in gold if you fancied. But I think silver is the, I hate to say right choice, but that's my reasoning anyhow. Then for those gold details, what I'm going to use is actually weapon bronze. Now, as a quick point of order, on his sword here, this, if I'm remembering correctly, would actually have been just a darker gunmetal. But I want a bit of bronze here. That's it. I figure once we've crossed into the realm of Richard Sharpe, Vampire Hunter, I can paint his bloody sword how I like. So, once you're finished with the little bits of brass and gold that you want to include, cruise around with your base colors and tidy up anything that you need to, and he'll be ready for his wash. Alright, so with that dried, yeah, he's looking pretty good. That's turned out more or less like I planned, but the metal on his rifle is maybe not as dark as I would have liked. So what I'm going to do is just pop a little bit of dark tone over the top of this, and we'll give that time to dry again before moving on to highlights. Now, to highlight his uniform, I do think that going straight up to Guardian Green, which is the next green in the Deep Green Triad set, that would be a little bit light. So what I've done is actually go to my palette and I've mixed in half and half Angel Green and Guardian Green to give me a little bit of that bright, almost cartoony finish that Guardian Green's going to have without completely overpowering the Angel Green. And you'll notice as it goes on and dries, it will tone down a little bit. So I'm not going to go overboard with this. I want just a few little lines and scratches and what have you to add a bit of texture and shape to some of his uniform, but it doesn't need to be a huge amount. And to be honest, you might just like the way it looks as it is. Now for some of the black straps, leather pouches and what have you, I'm going to go back to deep grey, which we used to dry brush the black lacing earlier. I've thinned this down a little more than I normally would, and just a little bit of this to really catch the edges. I want to separate those areas of black from one another. So a tiny wee bit of deep grey to do that. Now here with some barbarian flesh, we're going to highlight his skin. Now the trick here is we want to cover over most of his face and hands, but leave a little bit of our shaded stuff in the recesses. Particularly when you're coming to his face here, what I tend to find is the easiest is to leave the bottom lip that shaded color that we've already got, because you can come back with a little bit of a red tone or something later on if in your fancy. But I would suggest it's much quicker just to not paint it at all. So, as much as possible, trying to follow the contours of his face. And if you've ever sat and watched, and I mean this in all seriousness, watch a makeup blending tutorial, it'll give you some really good pointers on how to accentuate the shape of a face. So, on the hands as well, let's make sure that we're not leaving those all grubby. Alright, now with ruby skin, we're going to go in and do that contouring. So before, we were laying in most of his skin with the barbarian flesh. Here we want to be a little bit more sparing. So concentrating towards the edges like his brows, cheekbones and what have you, to accentuate those high points on the face. Now it is easy to add too much of this and have him look really, really pale, but if you do, what you can do once you've finished is just to hit him with a thinned down flesh tone or a wash or something, and that'll make things look a little more reasonable again. So as well as his face, don't forget the backs of his knuckles. Yep, that's exactly what I thought I was going to do. Too much of that, and he's a little pale. So, What I have is, this is roughly half and half warm skin shade and speed paint medium. And we're just going to introduce a little bit more oomph into his skin here. Now, somebody did ask once upon a time if I deliberately made mistakes on camera so I could show you how to fix them. The short answer is no. Sometimes I do just make mistakes, but remember, we're just painting toy soldiers. It's never so hard to fix. You have to give up on it. Now while that's drying, I've got myself a little of that legendary red from earlier. Thin that down, and that's going to be my highlight. Well, let's have a quick look here. Is that going to be my highlight? Yeah, that'll work. Just a little bit of this on the red tassels. Again, too much will very quickly make it look orange, so don't go nuts. For his hair, I have a little bit of command khaki, and I'm actually going to run this mostly as a dry brush. Very lightly tickle along the edges of his hair to pick that up. Now I have also quickly touched in the wood with a little bit of that same color, and just a couple of stripes or two will make that look a little more lively. The last thing I'm going to do is with a tiny wee bit of Dorado skin, just pick out one or two extreme points on his face, like his chin, his nose tip, and his brow. That'll be plenty to really make that face pop. So what I'm going to do with this next is to go take him outside, hit him with a little bit of matte varnish from spray, and then we'll get him based up. Recipe for that will be in the description, same as always. So let's have a look at our Sharpe once he's all finished. And so, there at last, Richard Sharpe, Vampire Hunter, is complete. And if you are from Yorkshire, sorry. I lived there for a year or so, and I never quite picked up the accents, so don't be too harsh on me if it's not perfect. Now this was a lot of fun to do, and I think from here you could continue painting him quite happily. There's loads of extra stuff you could do. Highlight the jacket a little further, highlight the knapsack that he's carrying, but I just wanted to get him done, and I kind of figure, this is how I normally go about things. If I spend a bit of time on the face, nobody's looking at anything else. So yeah, that works. Hopefully as well, this goes to show that while a miniature can seem quite complex, or a color scheme can seem a little bit daunting, or there's just a load of stuff to do, sometimes rather than step 1, 2, 3, 4, like today we'd instead up with a, have a 1, 2, 1A, 2A, back and forth between the colors as necessary to make the steps themselves simpler. So again, thanks goes to Bill for letting me have the STL for this fella. Big fan of Bill's work. I will make sure that Lost Heresy Miniatures is linked in the description, so you can go check those out. As well, thanks goes to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue. And very importantly in this fella's case, resin, which includes my most gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram, they're both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.